A number of YouTubers have discussed SDR and really theorized on whether or not XRP could actually replace the SDR. And I believe that it could. And there's actually a very good case to be made for XRP to replace the SDR. But really the question at this point is, what is SDR? Who created it? And why was it actually created? Hi, this is Jeff with the HODL Report. Join me on today's video as we explore the SDR and the XRP standard. If you enjoyed today's video, please remember to give a thumbs up, leave some comments below, and if you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel. So let's jump right into it. So now before we get into SDR, let's first take a look at the IMF and some of the things that the IMF does. So the IMF is the International Monetary Fund. The IMF was actually created back in 1945 under the Bretton Woods Agreement, and we'll cover that in a little bit. But the IMF is actually an independent international organization made up of around 189 individual member countries. The IMF membership is the representation is really based on the size of each member's, the member country's country. Based on the higher net worth countries are essentially, they have a larger proportion of representation in the IMF. Again, based on their overall size in the global economy. What does the organization actually do? So the IMF promotes monetary cooperation through a balanced growth of international trade, provides resources to help members really in case of financial crisis, and to assist in the reduction of poverty in the developing nations. So it's really a big part of it is an outreach to the developing countries. The IMF is also in charge to handhold exchange rate stability. Now, I don't really have to speculate too much here that RippleNet using XCurrent and the XRapid solution would actually provide a very significant solution, a very important solution between the different member nations. The IMF, as I just stated, is dedicated to helping to foster international trade while helping developing countries reduce their poverty. So it would seem very likely that the technology of RippleNet fits the IMF initiative, right? So a reduction in the cost of transaction, saving the country's money, liquidity to move larger funds, which would be very important, so they don't have to provide and hold foreign exchange accounts, and then overall having complete transparency of transactions. So if the IMF is involved in the process, both parties need to be aware and be able to monitor the transaction. So the transparency is very important, and then also making sure that the transaction occurs rapidly, as we all know that the XRapid solution, XRP, would do. Now, the IMF isn't going to implement the RippleNet themselves, but the banks and the financial organizations in the countries that the IMF is working with to facilitate the financial transactions between these nations will. So again, this is going to be focused on the banks, but the IMF does have leverage with the various financial organizations or financial organizations and banks in these different nations. So the IMF would really get behind and is getting behind the concept of digital assets or digital currency. And actually in a recent article, and I think if others have talked about this, and really if you go online, you can research Christine Lagarde, who's the head of the IMF, but she's mentioned cryptocurrency multiple times. In a recent article, it came out a couple of days ago on November 13th in The Guardian, she actually stated that governments should strongly consider offering their own cryptocurrencies, and she really does envision a public/private relationship where the central banks of these countries are responsible for the cryptocurrency, for the digital asset, whereas the private sector is responsible for developing the up-and-coming new technologies that would be utilizing the blockchain or the cryptocurrency digital assets as part of their overall strategy. Now, what's interesting about the article is that Christine Lagarde expresses that central banks should embrace the cryptocurrency. So really this on its face, forget about all the other parts of the article. I think this is really the most interesting part as it really pertains to XRP, because if a central bank is going to develop its own digital asset technology, the question is, would they start from scratch, or would they really build it based on a proven technology, a technology that's already being implemented and embraced by banks around the world? So we know that XRP is being utilized via XRapid in a limited number of banks, but RippleNet as an overall solution is already being used by hundreds of banks, and soon those hundreds of banks will continue to grow into many, many more. But the majority of those banks will be embracing the full RippleNet solution, utilizing XRapid and therefore utilizing the XRP solution. Now, the central banks, so if we get back to the central banks, wouldn't it make sense for them to develop their technology, whether it's based on the XRP ledger or if they were to utilize XRP directly? So this, I think that's really interesting overall as we analyze this. Now, some of them might say that with only 100 billion XRP, there wouldn't be enough liquidity to accommodate all the different banks' needs. But really, if we look at each individual XRP can be broken down to a fraction of drops, with one XRP that equals 1 million drops. So based on that, there will be, and there is, sufficient liquidity really to go around based on what's needed. Now, as part of the IMF's economic oversight and economic stability initiative is the SDR. The SDR stands for Special Drawing Rights. Now, the SDR was actually set up back in 1969 under the Bretton Woods, with one XDR equaling $1. Now, this was basically, in my opinion, was the first actual stable coin. It was the first pegged coin. Bretton Woods was actually established back during World War II in 1944 to set up the rules of international financial relations between countries. So the primary countries that were involved in the Bretton Woods was the United States, Canada, Japan, Western Europe, Australia, and the primary goal of the Bretton Woods was to establish an exchange rate by tying the currencies to gold. The IMF was established at this time as well. And the U.S. at the time controlled about 2/3 of the world's gold. So actually the U.S. insisted that the Bretton Woods Agreement be based on gold and the U.S. dollar. Now, again, the SDR was set up in 1969 under Bretton Woods. And again, it was based on pegging one SDR to one U.S. dollar, which was also equivalent to 0.88 grams of gold. Now, the gold-backed U.S. dollar ended in 1971 when Nixon actually ended the gold-backed U.S. dollar. So we saw some changes at that time where now things were in flux. So where the SDR was actually developed with the intent of being a foreign exchange reserve, now they really needed to identify if there would be enough liquidity, since the U.S. dollar was the primary currency to back the back the SDR. In order to provide more liquidity, the quantity of available U.S. dollars would have to be extended. At the time, the U.S. was based on more conservative economic policy, but the U.S. did reluctantly agree really to change their monetary policy to give the sufficient liquidity for the SDR to serve as a foreign exchange reserve. Now, the SDR is essentially a basket of currencies. The value of the XDR averaged from the participating currencies. So the participating currencies of the SDR, we have US dollar, we have the British pound, we have the euro, we have the Japanese yen, and as of 2016, we have the Chinese renminbi. Now, each currency is weighted in the SDR based on the percentage that that currency is used as a foreign exchange reserve asset. So the US dollar being the largest is really the number one. I believe it's just over 40% of the SDR. Now, if we analyze what is, or define what is a foreign exchange reserve asset, countries central banks actually hold a specific amount of foreign currency in their reserve accounts. Now, most countries actually hold US dollars because it's the most popular currency that's used for trade, but many countries will be holding euro, they're holding British pound, they're both valuable currencies, as well as the Japanese yen. So I think you have the majority of foreign exchange transactions happening in US dollars, but we do see in the other currencies as well. Now, to date, the SDR, if we look it up right now, look up the SDR exchange, it's actually 1.39 SDR for every one US dollar. Just an interesting note. But now, in 2009, there was actually an issue, and there was a major financial crisis that really impacted globally. Now, since all of the world economies were reeling from this financial crisis, the IMF, through the use of the SDR, which was really meant to help offset and stabilize economies, one of the primary critiques of the SDR overall as to be a foreign exchange asset or a reserve asset was that there wasn't sufficient liquidity to facilitate the offset of economic turmoil in this situation, let alone assisting developing nations at this point. So in 2009, they actually increased the number of SDR from around 12 billion at the time to over 200 billion XDR. So this was really, to me, in my opinion, was really kind of arbitrary that in the middle of a financial crisis, they said, we don't have enough liquidity. Let's just make the liquidity. So they made liquidity, and they extended the number of SDR that was available, or XDR. And so in time of need, what do? You create more. In time of need, when you need more US dollars, you print more. But what happens in the end to our own currency, if you're printing more of that currency, it's devaluing the value of our currency. So it definitely does have an impact. Now, this is really where I see the use of XRP making a significant amount of sense to replace the SDR. Now, XRP has a set quantity. We know that it's 100 billion. As I previously mentioned, the one XRP is actually equal to 1 million drops. So from the 100 billion XRP, you expand on that, and you can easily get a significant amount of liquidity when you fractionalize each individual XRP. So if you think about the value of an XRP going up significantly, and then the offset with a fraction, we have 1 million drops. So this would, on its own, really facilitate the liquidity needed for a financial or economic bailout, as was experienced the need in 2009, without necessarily creating any form of deficit or the creation or extension of currencies. So I think this is really important. Now, the SDR being replaced by XRP would further make sense as more banks and central banks began to use RippleNet as a solution for cross-border payments with XRapid. Now, with XRapid being able to further extend liquidity. So all of it's like one big cycle, so all these little pieces of the puzzle, come together when we look at the SDR. Now, if we look at the SDR, we're talking about the globalization of the XRP. So I think really this is, it can be very significant overall as we analyze it. Whether it actually happens, I don't know. I'm just, looking at it from a perspective that it kind of makes sense that it would happen. So XRP would actually then become the primary exchange currency that cross-border transactions are completed in, as an overall percentage of cross-border payment transactions. And so right now we're seeing the primary goal of RippleNet and Ripple is to replace SWIFT. Eventually they replace the majority of or they take most of the customers away from SWIFT. You're going to see a lot of exchange happening through RippleNet, utilizing XRapid, utilizing XRP. And so the banks as a whole are slowly going to integrate and become used to using the RippleNet solution. Now, overall, XRP isn't really needed to be held by banks for liquidity, but if we start looking at XRP as a reserve exchange asset, obviously at that point, the central banks will want to begin holding a specific quantity of XRP. Now, if the central banks are holding XRP as a reserve exchange asset, then it would be very easy for the SDR in turn to be replaced with XRP. So you could either start it, from one way or the other, but all these pieces, again, banks start using RippleNet, banks start using the XRapid solution, XRP for liquidity. It becomes a standard of exchange. Central banks, if the XRP is a standard of exchange, the central banks will want to hold it as a reserve exchange asset. And then you see more of a global acceptance and global use of XRP. So that's really it for my video today. If you enjoyed today's video, give a thumbs up, leave some comments below. If you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel. Before I sign off, just one final note. I'm not a financial advisor. I'm not providing any form of financial advice, but if I am to offer you any kind of advice, then let it be this. Do your own research, invest only what you can afford, invest only what you can afford to lose, and don't buy or sell based on the FUD or FOMO that's spread online. And with that, I look forward to seeing you on my next video, and keep on hodling your crypto.